The year was 1492, and in the shadowy corridors of the Vatican, a secret so dark was unfolding that even today, the Church refuses to speak of it. On a humid Roman evening, as candles flickered in the papal chambers, Pope Alexander VI was about to make a decision that would stain his family's legacy with blood for generations to come. What you're about to hear is the story of the Borgia family's most guarded secret, one that involved poison, murder, and a conspiracy so twisted that it reached the very heart of Christianity itself. Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, was no ordinary pope. While most religious leaders preached about virtue and salvation, Alexander was busy fathering children, accumulating wealth, and orchestrating political murders. But even among his countless sins, there was one secret so heinous that the Vatican buried it deeper than any grave. It all began with his son, Cesare Borgia, a man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of Italian nobles. Cesare wasn't just ruthless, he was methodical in his cruelty. But what most people don't know is that behind Cesare's reign of terror was a weapon so deadly, so perfectly crafted that it became known as the Borgia family's ultimate secret. The weapon wasn't a sword or a cannon. It was a recipe. A poison so subtle, so undetectable, that victims would appear to die from natural causes. They called it La Cantarella, and it was about to change the course of European history. Picture this. Rome in the late 15th century was a city where power meant everything, and trust meant nothing. Noble families plotted against each other in gilded palaces while beggars starved in the streets below. The Pope himself lived more like an emperor than a holy man. And the Borgias were about to take this corruption to levels never seen before. Rodrigo Borgia had clawed his way to the papacy through bribery, blackmail, and promises he never intended to keep. His journey to power began decades earlier when he was just another ambitious Spanish cardinal. He understood that in Rome, everything had a price, including salvation itself. Every favor, every appointment, every blessing could be bought or traded, and Rodrigo became a master of this deadly game. But becoming Pope Alexander VI was just the beginning of his ambitions. He wanted to create a dynasty that would rule Italy for centuries. His children would become dukes and duchesses. His grandchildren would sit on thrones throughout Europe, and anyone who threatened this vision would simply disappear. The problem was, murder in Renaissance Italy was a messy business. Stab someone in broad daylight and you'd have witnesses. Hire an assassin and they might talk under torture. Poison someone with something obvious and people would ask questions. What the Borgias needed was something that looked like the hand of God himself. This is where the family's obsession with alchemy and forbidden knowledge comes into play. Rodrigo Borgia had spent years collecting ancient texts on poison making, consulting with mysterious scholars who claimed to possess secrets from the old world. He believed that knowledge was the ultimate weapon, and he was willing to dabble in practices that many considered witchcraft. Enter the family's most closely guarded secret, a poison that had been perfected over generations of experimentation. The recipe was known only to 3 people: Pope Alexander, his son Cesare, and his daughter Lucrezia, and they guarded it more fiercely than the crown jewels. This wasn't just family business. It was their insurance policy against a world full of enemies. La Cantarella wasn't just any poison. It was a masterpiece of medieval chemistry. The exact ingredients remain a mystery to this day, but historians believe it contained arsenic, lead, and phosphorus, mixed with other compounds in precise ratios that took years to perfect. Some accounts suggest the recipe included powdered diamonds, mercury, and even extracts from certain rare fungi found only in remote Italian caves. The creation process itself was a ritual shrouded in secrecy. The Borgias employed a mysterious figure known only as the alchemist, a man whose real name has been lost to history. He worked in hidden chambers beneath the Vatican, mixing his deadly concoctions by candlelight while the Pope himself prayed in the chapel above. The irony was not lost on anyone. While one Borgia communed with God, another was literally brewing death in the basement. The genius of La Cantarella wasn't just its lethality, it was its subtlety. A victim dosed with La Cantarella wouldn't drop dead at the dinner table. Instead, they would feel slightly unwell for days or even weeks, developing symptoms that looked exactly like common illnesses of the time. Fever, stomach pains, weakness, headaches that came and went like whispers of doom. The poison worked by slowly shutting down the body's vital functions. First, the victim would experience digestive problems. Their appetite would vanish. Their skin would take on a pale, waxy appearance. Then came the hallucinations, strange dreams that blurred the line between sleep and waking. Many victims spent their final days believing they were being visited by angels, never realizing they were actually dying from human malice. Then, just when they thought they were recovering, their condition would suddenly worsen, and death would come quietly, like a whisper in the night. The final stages were particularly cruel. Victims often regained consciousness just long enough to realize something was terribly wrong, before slipping into a coma from which they would never wake. The beauty of this method was its deniability. When a cardinal died after weeks of illness, who could prove it was murder? In an age before modern medicine, sudden death was common. Plague, fever, and mysterious ailments claimed lives regularly. The Borgias became masters at making murder look like the will of God, and they took a perverse pleasure in attending the funeral masses of their own victims. But the real secret, the one the Vatican still hides today, wasn't just about the poison itself. It was about how they used it, and who they used it on. The Borgia family didn't just poison their enemies. They poisoned other members of the church, cardinals who opposed their policies, bishops who asked too many questions, and even fellow priests who threatened to expose their corruption. In essence, Pope Alexander VI was systematically murdering his own clergy. Think about that for a moment. The man who claimed to be Christ's representative on earth was killing his own bishops. The shepherd was slaughtering his own flock, and doing it all while maintaining the appearance of holiness and divine authority. Cesare Borgia became the family's primary enforcer. He would attend elaborate banquets and social gatherings, charming his victims with wit and charisma, all while slipping tiny amounts of La Cantarella into their wine or food. Cesare had perfected the art of conversation, keeping his targets engaged and distracted while death literally passed their lips. He could discuss philosophy, art, or politics while simultaneously committing murder. What made Cesare particularly dangerous was his intelligence. He wasn't just a brute with a poison bottle. He was a brilliant strategist who understood human psychology. He knew exactly how much poison to use, when to use it, and how to ensure his victims never suspected they were being murdered. Some accounts describe him carrying a special ring with a tiny compartment that could release La Cantarella into a wine cup with just a simple gesture. He became so skilled at this deadly art that some historians believe he may have poisoned over 40 people during his lifetime. Each death was carefully planned and executed. Each victim was chosen for maximum political or financial benefit. And each murder brought the Borgia family closer to their ultimate goal of absolute power. The most shocking part: many of their victims were invited to dine at the papal palace itself. Imagine being a cardinal, called to break bread with the Pope, only to unknowingly consume your own death sentence. The very halls where Christ's representative on earth was supposed to offer sanctuary became a hunting ground for the Borgia family. Every dinner invitation was potentially a death warrant. These papal banquets became legendary for their opulence: gold plates, rare wines, exotic foods from across the Mediterranean. Musicians would play while servants attended to every need. Guests would feast and laugh, never realizing they might be consuming their final meal. The Borgias had turned hospitality into homicide, and they did it with such style that their victims felt honored to attend. But perhaps the darkest aspect of this secret was how they selected their targets. The Borgias didn't just kill for political gain, they killed for pure greed. When they needed money for their lavish lifestyle, they would simply identify wealthy cardinals or nobles, invite them for dinner, and wait for nature to take its course. After their victims died, the Borgias would seize their property and wealth, often claiming the deceased had left everything to the church in their will. One of their most audacious crimes involved Cardinal Adriano Castellesi, a man whose only fault was being too rich for his own good. Castellesi owned vast estates throughout Italy, priceless art collections, and enough gold to fund a small army. The Borgias invited him to a seemingly friendly dinner at the Vatican, discussing matters of faith and church politics while poison coursed through his system. 3 weeks later, he was dead, and his vast fortune had mysteriously disappeared into the papal treasury. The official cause of death was listed as fever, but those who knew the truth understood they had witnessed the perfect crime. Murder disguised as divine will, theft presented as religious inheritance. The pattern became so obvious that some members of the church began to suspect what was happening. Cardinals started declining dinner invitations. Bishops began traveling with food tasters, and whispers of poison began echoing through the Vatican corridors. But who could accuse the Pope himself of murder? And even if they tried, they might find themselves invited to the next papal banquet. This climate of fear created a strange paradox within the church. While the Borgias consolidated power through terror, they also had to maintain the appearance of holiness. They continued to perform masses, deliver sermons about love and forgiveness, and present themselves as moral authorities. The psychological toll of this double life was evident in their increasingly erratic behavior. Pope Alexander began suffering from what we might now recognize as paranoia. He installed elaborate security measures in his private chambers, employed multiple food tasters, and rarely ate meals that hadn't been prepared by his most trusted servants. The poisoner had become terrified of being poisoned, and every shadow seemed to hide a potential assassin. This reign of terror continued for over a decade. The Borgias eliminated rivals, accumulated vast wealth, and consolidated power throughout Italy, all while maintaining the facade of religious authority. Pope Alexander even had the audacity to preach about sin and redemption from the same pulpit, where he planned his next murders. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it was also brilliantly effective. But every dynasty, built on blood, eventually faces its reckoning. In 1503, fate played a cruel joke on the Borgia family. During one of their own dinner parties, something went terribly wrong. Both Pope Alexander and Cesare Borgia became violently ill after dining together. The very poison that had served them so well may have finally turned against its masters. The symptoms were unmistakable. The same fever, weakness, and digestive problems they had inflicted on so many others, leading many to believe they had accidentally poisoned themselves with their own weapon. Some accounts suggest they had prepared a special dinner for a wealthy cardinal, but had somehow consumed the poisoned wine themselves in the confusion of the evening. The Pope died within days. His body bloated and discolored in a way that suggested poisoning. His death was so obviously unnatural that Vatican officials struggled to explain it. Cesare survived, but was so weakened that he lost most of his political power. Some historians believe they were victims of their own La Cantarella, while others think a rival family had finally turned their own weapon against them. With Alexander's death, the Borgia dynasty crumbled almost overnight. Their enemies emerged from the shadows, their wealth was seized, and their secrets began to surface. But by then, the damage was done. The Catholic Church had been forever stained by their reign of corruption and murder. Trust in papal authority would never fully recover. The Vatican's response to these revelations was swift and decisive. They buried every document, destroyed every piece of evidence, and forbade anyone from speaking about the Borgia crimes. The official church history was rewritten to minimize their corruption, and the true extent of their murders was hidden from the world. Even today, Vatican archives contain sealed sections that scholars believe hold the complete truth about the Borgias, but the secret of La Cantarella lived on in whispers, Generations of Italian nobles would warn their children about accepting invitations from certain families. The recipe itself was never found, leading some to believe it was destroyed, while others think it might still exist somewhere in the Vatican's secret archives, waiting to be rediscovered by some future historian brave enough to seek the truth. What makes this story even more chilling is how the Vatican continues to handle it today. While they acknowledge that the Borgias were corrupt, they refuse to discuss the specific details of their crimes. Church historians are forbidden from researching certain aspects of their reign, and access to relevant documents remains strictly limited. The cover-up continues centuries after the crimes themselves. The Borgia family's darkest secret represents more than just a series of murders. It reveals how power can corrupt even the most sacred institutions, and how those in authority will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their interests. The fact that these crimes were committed by the head of the Catholic Church itself makes them all the more shocking. In the end, the Borgia's reign of terror serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind even the most righteous facades. Their poison may have claimed dozens of lives, but their true legacy is the lasting damage they inflicted on the Church's moral authority. They prove that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it can transform religious leaders into cold-blooded killers. And the next time you hear someone speak about the sanctity of religious institutions, remember the Borgia family, and ask yourself what other dark secrets might still be hidden in the shadows of history. If stories like this fascinate you, consider subscribing to The Grey Hour for more hidden truths from history's darkest chapters. Because sometimes, the most shocking secrets are the ones that powerful people never want you to discover.